like I said, we're going to be going over ground ladders today. Um, First thing I want to do is just read off all the objectives to you guys. That way you kind of know what to expect throughout the portion of the class. And then we just touch on those as we go throughout the presentation. So the first objective is going to be describe the process of cleaning, inspecting, and maintaining a ladder. We're going to describe safe practices for using ladders. Describe the process of carrying a ladder. We're going to describe the proper procedure for placing a ground ladder. We're going to describe ways to secure a ground ladder. We're going to talk about the methods for raising and lowering a ladder. Once we hit those are basically the presentations ones. We're going to talk about the 2 firefighter ladder carry and raise as one of the objectives, and then the last one's just cleaning, inspecting, and maintaining a ground ladder. And when we go outside and do the practicals later, we'll touch on those again. So let me get my clicker here. If anybody has any questions or comments during the presentation at all, just raise your hand and we'll touch on that. So first thing, parts of a ladder. So we've got a couple different types of ladders in the fire service. This one here is just your single ladder. Up and down here we've got the rungs, the beams on each side, the 2 hooks at the top, the rails along the beams with the truss blocks. The bottom of the ladder, we call that the butt or the spurs. Each ladder should have a heat sensor label on it, and it's important that we check those, during our truck checks after each use, just to make sure that there's no damage caused to those heat sensors. So the first learning objective, describe the process of cleaning, inspecting, and maintaining a ladder. So you guys said that you work here in Lincoln County. How do you, properly clean, inspect, and maintain your ladders?
So we inspect our ladders at every shift change and after incidents, and then to maintain the ladder as far as cleaning. When the ladders get dirty, we pull them off and we wash them according to manufacturer's recommendations.
Yeah, absolutely. The manufacturer specifications, whatever they recommend, definitely we want to follow that. A couple things to look at during the inspection. We want to cover all parts of the ladder. So whether you start at the bottom and go to the top, or the top and go to the bottom, just develop a process that works for you and your guys' shift. We're going to determine cause of excessive wear and inspect per your standard operating procedures, whatever those might be here at Lincoln County for you guys. We want to hit the inspections after each use. We want to hit it monthly. I believe we talked about that in Fire 1 and 2, just making sure we hit all those major bullet points at least once a month. But like I said before, definitely after each use. We kind of touched on the heat sensor labels on the metal and the fiberglass ladders. We're going to be checking for the carbon deposits, the blistering paint on the ladder tips, discoloration on the fiberglass. That little heat sensor will change color. It'll go to dark, from the orange to the dark, and that'll kind of let you know that it's time to replace that heat sensor label. If you do that, it's definitely important to have them tested, just like you have on an annual test. You want to pull it out of service and test it again, just to make sure that everything is good to go on it. We're looking for rung damage and wear. We're going to check each rung, twist it, see if it's loose. If it's loose, we want to tag it and put it out of service. All the bolt and rivet tightness, cracks or defects in the welds, splintering, breaks, gouges, discoloration, all that. If it looks deformed, if it looks bent after a use, we want to pull it out of service and have it tested, replaced, or repaired. If there was a part of the ladder that was on a vibration at points, or on the apparatus, or on scene, we want to just check that area and look it over and make sure everything's good to go. All right, so just a note here, replace heat sensors when their expiration date is reached. Do you guys have a date that you go through and just, check those dates on a monthly basis, I'm sure?
Yeah, I would say that each crew is kind of responsible for their own. At a bare minimum, we said we do that on a monthly basis, if not a weekly basis.
Right. Bolts on the wooden ladders should not be so tight that they can crush the wood. Remember, wood's just, obviously it's weaker than the metal, or the aluminum ladders that we're working with. So if you're really cranking those bolts down, you're ultimately damaging your wooden ladder. Major warning here, any ladder that has been subjected to direct flame contact, has been exposed to high heat, or has a heat sensor label that has changed color is unsafe for use and should be removed from service for testing. And that just kind of reiterates, we kind of talked about that earlier. You know, if you recognize something on your ladder during your truck check, or it's been exposed, you know, on the fire ground to something that could cause damage to the ladder, we want to get it out of service and test it that way. You know, someone doesn't get hurt in the future. So kind of a, you know, checklist going through, just reiterate it. We found the damage, we're gonna remove it from service. If it's unable to be repaired, we need to get rid of the ladder. So destroy it, we need to scrap it for parts. There might be something on that ladder we might be able to salvage for a different ladder, but mainly it needs to be 100% in good working order all of the time. So we'll talk about some ladder markings here. So on all of your ladders, are they labeled, you know, how long each one is, or is it just kind of like, we know that this one's a 35-foot extension ladder?
So not only are ladders labeled at the butt there, but they're also labeled in the compartments themselves. So as a quick reference, when you open the compartment door, you know how the ladders are stacked in there for quick deployment, and also placing them back into service on the apparatus.
Right. So try to limit the confusion as much as possible. Side note, do you guys put like a marking on the center of your ladder, you know, to kind of know that balance point when you're carrying it? If you're just like a one-man, low shoulder, high shoulder carry?
Yeah, we got a center point mark on there. We also got markers on there to mark where it sits on the ladder rack itself.
Oh, cool. So that way, you know, when you're going to put it back on, it goes on, you know, fly section first or bedside first, and which rung lines up with what. Yeah. There's a lot of departments that are doing that now to limit confusion and all that. So we got the designated length, manufacturer's nameplate, apparatus designation, white tip or reflective tape, you know, on that. We've got the balance point stripe, which we just talked about. Note here, wood ladder should not be painted because it can conceal damage to the wood. Why would it conceal damage to the wood? Obviously, it's because it's a different material than the aluminum or the metal, and therefore you're damaging your ladder, which could cause problems on the scene in the future. So we've got some different labels to look for on your ladders. Manufacturer certification label, electrical hazard warning label, ladder positioning label, and a heat sensor label. So we talked about the heat sensor label. When we're looking at an electrical hazard, what's one of the main things we do to prevent that?
Watching the positioning of the ladder itself. So stay within or outside of the 10-foot range, look above, around prior to raising that ladder.
Yeah, and you know, when I was in the academy, I always said check for overhead obstructions. You know, so when you're raising your ladder, definitely look out for that, and we'll talk about that more later on in this presentation. So when we're inspecting the metal ladders, evidence of flame, impingement or heat damage, corrosion, missing rivets and fasteners, damaged rungs, cracked spins, and other damage. With the wood, we got the dry rot damage to the halyard on, you know, your extension ladders as well. Just kind of touching base on all that. We discussed that a little bit. When we're looking at fiberglass ladders, what are a couple things we're looking for on those?
We don't particularly have fiberglass ladders, but I would imagine like any sort of cracks or damage, heat damage to the ladder itself.
Exactly. You're looking at pretty much the same stuff. Cracks, chipping, loose rivets, flame damage, corrosion, damaged rungs, missing rubber on the foot pads, dry rot, or damage to the halyard. So it's kind of repetitive here when we're talking about the ladder and what we're looking for on the inspection and the maintenance of it, aspect of it. So wooden ladders or ladders with wooden components. When we're inspecting those, we want to look at the areas where finish has been chafed or scraped, darkening of the varnish. If we're looking at darkening of the varnish, obviously that might be from, you know, it having a high heat exposure for a certain amount of time. Dark streaks in the wood, marred, worn, cracked, or splintered parts, shoes, rounded or smooth, and water damage. Caution here, any indication of wood deterioration is reason for the ladder to be removed from service until it can be service tested. So again, we're reiterating this, you know, if you guys see something with your ladders that doesn't look right, we need to take it out of service and have it tested. With the roof ladder, this is the one that we talked about right at the beginning where we discussed the different parts. The hook assemblies up top, they should operate with ease, no signs of rust or deformation, no loose parts. So those pretty much all operate the same. You push them in, you give them a twist, and they come out just like shown here. Those, you know, you can use them to hook onto whatever you're climbing onto. Obviously, one of the main things is just the peak of that roof and makes the ease of going up it just a little bit better. When we're looking at inspecting extension ladders, the pawl assembly hook and finger should move freely. The halyard cable, the pulleys, the ladder guides, everything should be moving freely with ease. And fly sections moving freely, just like I said. If you know you're having difficulty pulling that halyard and it feels like something's not right, it might just need a good cleaning. So we'll refer to manufacturer specifications for that. Beyond that, something could be loose, so pull it out of service, look it over, test it, do whatever you need to do to make sure it's in good working order. All right, a review question here. Compare and contrast inspection requirements for different types of ladders. Obviously, there's a lot of the same stuff we're looking at when we're inspecting ladders. What might be a difference between a wooden ladder and an aluminum ladder that we're looking for in an inspection?
The coloration of the varnish itself. On
Yeah.
On the wooden ladder.
Yep, absolutely. So when we're service testing ladders, we want to do it before being placed in service, annually while in service, and then after any use that exposes them to high heat or rough treatment. Let's talk about the cleaning. Obviously, number one, we want to refer to manufacturer specifications, but if you know we're not able to find that somewhere, just a light soap and some water usually just does the trick. So it's important to remember we want to use a soft bristle brush and running water. So like we just said, mild soap and water, solvents to remove tar, oil, you know, greasy residues. We want to lubricate to our standard operating procedures and manufacturer's recommendations if we need it. We want to look for damage and wear while cleaning and report defects to our immediate supervisor or whoever is in charge of taking care of the ladders in your guys' department. And then we definitely want to wipe dry after cleaning it. If we don't wipe it dry, that can obviously lead to you know, weakening of certain components of the ladder, whether that be rust or the halyard, the rope, you know, becomes weak. So how often should ladders be cleaned?
After every use.
That's right, after every use. We're looking at maintenance and repair. We want to always keep them in a state of usefulness and readiness. So kind of going back to our truck checks, you know, that's why we do them. We want to make sure everything is good to go. All firefighters should be able to perform maintenance on these things. When it comes to repair, we restore or replace what is damaged or worn out. It must be done by a trained technician. We want to keep them free of moisture, store or position ladders away from vehicle exhaust or engine heat. We want to store them so they are not exposed to the weather elements, and paint only for purposes of identification or visibility. So if we're going to paint them, you know, at the tip or at the butt end, that way we can see, you know, where the ends are at. So review question, what are some general maintenance requirements for ladders?
Cleaning them after every use.
Cleaning them after every use. We'll just touch on a couple other things real quick. Obviously, when we're looking at the inspection aspect of it, if we see something that might be loose, or
if you see something wrong, report it. You need to report it too.
yeah, absolutely. And that just kind of all falls under the general maintenance of it as well. The weekly or monthly or daily inspection of it, it's just very vital. So we'll hit this next learning objective real quick. Describe safe practices for using ladders. So just right off the bat, what's one safe practice that we want to use when using a ladder?
Don't hit anybody with the ladder.
Don't hit anybody with the ladder. Absolutely. When we're carrying these things around the fire ground, we always want to be aware of our surroundings. In full PPE all the time. You know, just making sure we're aware of what's going on. That way nobody gets injured, right?
Right.
All right, so just some guidelines to go by here. Develop and maintain upper body strength. Most of these ladders are not, light, so it's going to require some, strength to carry them on the fire ground. We want to operate according to departmental training and procedures. Like we said, we're going to wear full PPE when handling and working with ladders. We want to choose the correct ladder for the assigned use or the job or whatever we got going on. So, obviously if we have an attic fire, it might be most appropriate to grab an attic ladder versus the 35-foot extension ladder, We want to use our leg muscles, not the back or arms. And then when lifting, below the waist, obviously. So we want to try not to lift with our backs, use our legs. That way we can take some of the strength and distribute it equally and, prevent injuries from happening. We want to use an adequate number of firefighters to carry and raise. Do not raise within 10 feet of electrical wires. I think you actually said that at the beginning when we were talking about, some of the dangers that are incorporated. Definitely secure the tip and anchor foot during training or emergencies. Grasp the beams. Ensure the hooks of balls are seated over the rungs. A few others here. Ensure the ladder is stable. Use caution when moving sideways. Why? I think you said it back there. Nobody needs to be getting hit with the ladder. Climb smoothly and rhythmically. We want to use a leg lock or ladder belt when working from the ladder. Relocate position ladder only when ordered to do so. Use ladders for intended purposes only.
Fire 6414, response expected West Park Drive, jail side for fire alarm. Lincoln County Fire 6414, response expected West Park Drive, jail side, fire alarm 1220.
Oh. Did you get paused?
Not yet.
Did you rewind back to see where you were at?
So we were on this slide here. So back to talking about ladder safety guidelines. We want to use a leg lock or ladder belt when working from the ladder. Make sure we're securely and safely, in that ladder in case something were to happen. Relocate position ladder only when ordered to do so. It's important that you're in good communication with everybody on the scene and with command. That way they know what's going on, and when you know what's going on, to just operate more safely. We want to use ladders for intended purposes only, and expect for damage and wear after each use. We touched on that. The first objective: secure unattended ladders to a stationary object, and then whatever that object may be, we want to make sure that that object isn't going to move or fall or put us in a position that's going to make it unsafe. Warning: ladders coming in contact with power sources may result in electrocution of anyone in contact with the ladder. We talked about this a few times already. It's probably one of the most important things that I think needs to be reiterated. Checking for overhead obstructions, watching out for electrical lines, things like that. Sliding down a ladder either feet first or head first, even in an emergency, is unsafe and may result in serious injury or death. The rungs are there for a reason. We need to climb them smoothly and rhythmically like we talked about. Sliding up and down a ladder, that's a big no. It's very unsafe. All right, so a review question. List 10 general guidelines for ladder safety. I'll start. Just a couple of them. We always want to be sure we're operating in a safe environment. We want to check for overhead obstructions. Okay, why are we checking for overhead obstructions? Electrical. There could be something up there that we don't want our ladder to touch, obviously, right? A couple other general guidelines for ladder safety is when we're moving a ladder, right? We want to have the appropriate amount of people to lift that ladder. Okay, when it comes to lifting a ladder, what are a couple things that we might need to do so that way we don't hurt ourselves?
We want to lift with our legs and not our back.
Right. Lift with the legs, not the back. We don't want to twist. We want to distribute that weight evenly, throughout our body to, just be more safe about it. And that way nobody gets hurt. Can anybody think of any others? Maybe just like one or two more things.
We definitely want to look overhead for obstructions. I'm not sure if you mentioned that. Electrical hazards, stuff like that. And then make sure whether we remain in contact with the ladder, both climbing up and climbing down from the ladder.
Yeah, absolutely. So we touched on overhead obstructions, maintaining good contact with that ladder, whether you're on it and working or whether you're heeling that ladder for somebody that is working. It needs to be stable. It needs to be secure. So again, we'll touch on electric hazards. So avoiding electrical hazards, we want to look up to check for overhead wires or equipment. So check for overhead obstructions. Look up again before raising the ladder. There could have been something that you missed the first time that you looked up. Just kind of like we do a primary and secondary search, we need to look up twice. Keep distance at least 10 feet apart from energized electrical lines or equipment. We touched on this a few times already, but it's something that needs to be reiterated. So if there are electrical lines or if there is an overhead obstruction that we want to try to avoid, there are things that we can do to get that ladder up in a safe manner. So alternate raising method when necessary. So we want to watch that path of travel. If obviously we're just raising it up normally, here on this picture you can see that this is not the way to do it. Because if we raise it normally, we're going to hit into those electrical lines. We could do a beam raise instead, or a modified raise. So we could carry it past the point of the overhead obstruction that we want to avoid, do a beam raise, and still be able to get that ladder up and still operate in a safe manner, 10 feet away from that electrical, and still be able to get the job done. Warning, all ladders will conduct electricity, especially when wet, regardless of their construction material. All right, so positioning the fly section. Fly out versus fly in. We kind of talked about that when we talked about the parts of the ladder. The fly section is the section that extends up, and then the bed section is the one that stays stationary. When we do this, we want to secure the halyard, or the rope that comes down the center of the ladder. That's known as the halyard. We want to secure it and tie it off after placement and before climbing. We can use a clove hitch for that. We can put a safety knot on that, but we want to make sure that it is secured. We want to close the halyard that's already tied. Review question for that, and what kind of we just touched on there. How can you avoid electrical hazards when raising a ladder?
By looking up multiple times.
Looking up multiple times. So the example that I gave for that, we do a primary search and a secondary search. We want to look up once, and then we want to look up twice before we raise that ladder. How should the fly of a metal or fiberglass extension ladder be positioned? Out. Yep. Learning objective number 5. This is one of the other objectives that I read at the beginning of the lecture. Describe the process of carrying a ladder. Now, there's more than one way to carry a ladder, but as long as you're doing that in a safe manner with the good amount of people, then we should have no problem. So when we remove a ladder from an apparatus, right, we carry our ladders on our fire trucks to the fire or the emergency or wherever we're going. We can carry them on a pumper apparatus or an aerial apparatus. Here, if we're on a pumper apparatus, it's probably going to take 1 or 2 firefighters to remove the ladder off the apparatus. If we're on an aerial apparatus, there might be 3 or 4 firefighters that might need to be required just because we're carrying a bigger and heavier ladder. When it comes to selecting the right ladder, there's a few things that need to go into that. Are we just trying to make access into an attic? Are we trying to go up on the roof and then some? Or are we trying to, use an aerial ladder to get to a multi-level, structure to make a rescue or anything like that? So the incident commander supervisor usually determines ladder and ladder placement, but you must be able to select your own. There's going to be times on the fire ground where you have to make that decision yourself. There's not going to be an incident commander there yet. And it's important that you kind of know what you're looking for when making that decision. When working on a roof or upper story, there must be at least 2 means of escape at locations remote from each other. So 2 ways out, right? We don't just want one way out and one way in. We want to have 2 ways to get out of, an unsafe situation. All right, so selecting the correct ladder. We've got a nice table here, a nice guide. We'll just go over this here quick. So just a first story roof, recommended 16 to 20 feet. We're going to a second story window. We want 20 to 28 feet. The second story roof, 28 to 35. If we're hitting a third story window or roof, we want a 40 to 50 foot ladder, and a fourth story roof over 50 feet. I think that the third story window or roof or 4th story roof, we're mostly looking at an aerial, to reach those. Everything else below that, you might carry on your fire truck here, which brings me to, what is the longest ladder that you guys carry besides the aerial?
35.
35. Do you think you use that the most, or maybe a roof ladder the most?
The attic ladder.
Yeah. And then I'm sure that there differs between, departments and where you're going. But for you guys, it's the attic ladder. So anybody wants a copy of this, I can print a couple of them off and leave them around the engine house for you guys. When it comes to length, the total length of a single section ladder and maximum extended length of an extension ladder, not the ladder's reach. Single, roof, and folding ladders are required to have measured length equal to designated length. Extension ladders may be as much as 6 inches, 150 millimeters less than designated length. So just some, math there. When we're working on the roof, we want to be 3 to 5 rungs beyond the roof edge. Why?
We want to be able to have a reference point to get to that ladder if we're on the roof, and then when we're getting onto the roof, we want to be able to get above the gutter line.
Right, absolutely. Almost kind of you want to like step down onto the roof versus stepping, up onto it. When you're above it, you can see more of what's going on. You'll be able to sound whatever, area you're going on to first, versus just having a blind step and that roof being, the structural integrity of it being weak and not being able to see what's going on with it. When we're talking about ventilation, we want to, even with the window, to the upwind side. Why do we want to be on the upwind side? If we're on the other side, we're just going to have a bunch of smoke and debris blowing into our face. We don't want that. If we're making a rescue, the tip needs to be below the windowsill. It's the easiest access when we're bringing a victim out or we're going in to that room. Note here, building walls or parapets that extend more than 6 feet above the roof may require the use of an additional ladder to reach the roof deck. You can place a roof or straight ladder on the roof side of a parapet wall and next to the extension ladder to assist firefighters to and from the roof. Has anybody ever experienced this on a call or on an inspection?
I can't say that I've ever experienced this.
I feel like the parapets are pretty common when it comes to commercial buildings.
A lot of your strip malls.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, a lot of them have that.
I would say a lot of the parapets that we've experienced were a lot shorter, not that necessarily that high.
Sure. So here's another chart. Maximum working heights for ladders set at proper climbing angle. I'll leave this printed out for you guys. You guys can look at it as you wish. But it just kind of goes in detail, designated length of the ladder and what that maximum reach might be. So a review question. How can you determine the appropriate size ground ladder to use for a situation? Anybody?
Math.
There might be some math involved with that. Obviously, you know, we kind of go back to, is incident command going to be there? Is incident command not going to be there? Right? So it's going to be your call. Do you think you're going to need a ground ladder for this situation? Do you think you're going to need an extension ladder for this situation? You're probably not wrong if you're going to want that extra bit of length for the ladder that you're going to grab. But I think it most definitely comes down to just obviously training, being familiar with your ladders, knowing the lengths, knowing what you can and can't do with each one. To when you're really trying to determine the size of ground ladder used for that situation. So just we touched on this right at the beginning of this objective, removing ladders from the apparatus. So when you're pulling a ladder off your pumper or your engine, it's probably going to take 1 to 2 guys, versus when you're pulling it off the aerial, you're probably going to need 3 guys. How we're storing them here, we got a vertical exterior rack in the top left there. We got the vertical interior compartment. We got the mechanical rack, that's the one where they're placed up top and the rack comes down the side. And then the bottom left there, the horizontal interior compartment. Now, which one on your guys' trucks how do you guys store your ladders?
The bottom 2.
The bottom 2? Okay. I haven't really seen the vertical exterior rack much, maybe on like the older trucks, but I think everybody's kind of going to keeping them inside and out of the inclement weather, you know?
Station 4 tanker.
No, you guys have a tanker that carries them like that? Gotcha. So, kind of going back to what we talked about, when we're training with our ladders, you're going to be familiar with the lengths and the types, right? So when we're moving them from the apparatus, you must know that what type it is, the length, the location of the ladders on the apparatus, how they're stored, how they're nested, how to remove them, order in which nested ladders are stored. So you might have your extension ladder stored first, and then on top of that, you might have your roof ladder. So we don't need to be putting them back, you know, opposite of how they're stored. Whether extension ladders fly as inside or outside, method used to secure ladders in place. You could use, you know, a bungee cord or a ratchet strap or the lever that holds them in place on the truck, the mounting bracket locations. So we kind of talked about that earlier. You know, you said that you have them marked on your ladders on that rung where they go on the truck, right?
Yes.
Many departments find it good practice to mark ladders to indicate which rungs go in or near brackets. So will you guys do that? That's fantastic. So when we're moving them, we're removing a mounted ladder, we need to unlatch the securing device, lift ladder off the bracket, and into a carrying position. So depending on the type of truck, you know, you might need 1 to 2 people, you might need 3 to 4 people. In the internal compartments, obviously we'll open the compartment access panel. We'll slide the ladder out to the proper carrying point, and then you'll position your guys wherever they need to be on that ladder. When we go outside and do the practicals, we'll practice that. How do we take them off, where the guys need to be. We'll look at all those markings and stuff you guys have on your ladders. Question, how are ground ladders mounted on apparatus? So on your apparatus, how are they mounted?
Horizontally in the rear of the apparatus or on the mechanical ladder racks.
Cool. So how are ground ladders mounted on apparatus in your jurisdiction? We just talked about that. Some safety considerations for carrying ladders. Avoid obstructions. Maintain situational awareness. Lift with your legs rather than your back. Look ahead to scan for obstructions, not once, but twice. We talked about using an appropriate number of personnel. So depending on what type of ladder it is, how heavy it is, that's going to determine how many guys you need. Work and communicate as a team. If you're using more than one person to carry the ladder, you have to communicate. The guy up front might want to go to the left, the guy in the back might want to go to the right. So it's important to designate one person, you know, to make that call as to where that ladder is going to go. Carry roof ladders with the hooks closed. The hooks at the top, make sure they're closed. If we're carrying them around and they're open, like we talked about earlier, someone could get hit with the ladder, right? And carry them with the butt in first. So caution here, When performing a one firefighter carry, carry the forward end of the ladder below eye level. Carrying the forward end at eye level impedes the carrier's balance and visibility and increases the risk of the butt spur striking someone else on the head. You don't want anybody to get hurt on the fire ground. So, review question here. What safety guidelines should be followed when carrying ground ladders?
The appropriate amount of people to carry the ladder.
Use the appropriate amount of people to carry the ladder.
Don't hit people with the ladder.
Don't hit people with the ladder. Make sure the hooks are closed, right?
Carry the front lower than the back if you're carrying one man.
Absolutely. So learning objective 6 here. Let's take a 5 to 10 minute break and then we'll come back to this. Everybody's cool with that? Cool. fine. You guys ready to get back at it?
Yeah, you guys ready?
I'm ready, let's go.
All right, so touching back on the learning objectives that we talked about at the beginning of the presentation, this next one, describe the proper procedure for placing a ground ladder. This is very important. We don't want to place that ground ladder in, a hazardous environment. We need to be looking out for things, and we will talk about what those things are. Situational awareness, ladder assignments. Observe and communicate. We need to obviously look overhead, electrical wires, and obstructions. So check for overhead obstructions. I know I probably said that 1,000 times for this presentation, but that is, it's a main thing that we need to be aware of. We want to check out those ground conditions. Are we placing the ladder in a foot of mud? Are we putting it in a puddle? Or is it gravel? Is it asphalt? All of those things need to be taken into consideration when we're looking at the building or what we're putting that ladder up against. Is the integrity of that building okay for that ladder to rest up against? Wind direction and speed. We talked about the ladder placement. If we're working off the ladder, we want to be away from the wind. That way everything's blowing away from us. We want to make sure that we choose the right ladder for the right job. And definitely want to check out the structural features of the building as well. Some ladder placement objectives. Position ladder properly for its intended use. So that kind of goes back to, we've got a roof ladder, it's got a specific use. We've got an extension ladder. We're trying to get somewhere that we can't get to with a roof ladder, right? We want to place the butt the proper distance from the building for easy, safe climbing. Whether this be ventilation or rescue, we talked about this. If we're ventilating, we want to be on the upwind side of the window, tip even with the top, right? Use when firefighters need to climb in or out of narrow windows or direct hose streams into them. Okay, if we're making the rescue, we want to be slightly below the window. I'd say it's kind of difficult to do a rescue if the ladder is on this side or that side of the window. It doesn't make it very easy. If the ladder's below the window where it should be, it makes gaining entrance and coming out of it a lot easier. Just some more guidelines for ladder placement here. We want to place ladders near at least 2 points on different sides of the building. Avoid placing over openings where they might be exposed to heat or direct flame. We want to take advantages of strong points in building construction. If we've got, Bravo side's a lot more, structurally intact than the Charlie side, we definitely want to be putting them the Bravo side then, right? Raise ladder directly in front of the window when it is used as support for a smoke ejector. Avoid placing ladders where they may contact overhead obstructions. So that last one, a few slides ago, we kind of talked about if there is an overhead obstruction, there might be another way to raise that ladder, like the beam raise, like we talked about, avoiding that overhead obstruction and still being able to get the ladder up and do the job. Avoid placing on uneven terrain or soft spots, placing in front of paths of travel, placing on top of sidewalk, elevator trapdoors, or deadlights. Do not place against unstable surfaces. All these things make using the ladder very unsafe. So it's important that we're operating on level ground. We've got the right amount of guys that are supporting that ladder while whoever is up working on the ladder is doing it in a safe manner. So when we talk about the climbing angle, okay, the distance of the ladder butt from the building establishes angle between ladder and the ground, right? So what is that proper angle we're looking for when we're setting up that ladder to climb?
75 degrees.
75 degrees, yep. So what is a way that we can check to make sure we're at that 75 degrees?
Well, arm's length out from your feet.
About an arm's length out from your feet. So when you put that ladder up against the building, and we'll do this when we go outside and do our practical portion, if we stand just like this and that ladder is right in front of us, we should be able to just reach out and grab one of these rungs, right? And that kind of gives us a pretty good, idea of that ladder is at that 75 degree mark, and we're going to be operating in a safe manner. So we just touched on the climbing angle here. Okay, review question here. What factors affect ground ladder placement?
Overhead of the structure.
Overhead obstructions. What about on the ground level?
Building features on the ground such as trap doors, basement doors, windows.
Yep, stuff like that.
Soft soil, soft mud.
Soft soil, soft mud. Yep. Uneven terrain. Could be gravel. It could be grass, asphalt. Just something to be aware of. So, what locations in your jurisdiction may present unique challenges to firefighters when raising ladders? So, for you guys here in Troy, what might be a challenge?
I would say probably septic tanks.
Yeah, septic tanks would probably be the biggest one.
Okay.
Not 100% sure where they're at all the time.
Yeah, I could see that. It's tough too, because this is rural and city, right? So mostly in your city, you're working on pavement a lot. Where you're going rural, then you're changing that terrain up quite a bit. So it could be wet, it could be uneven. It kind of goes back to what we're talking about. We want to try to avoid putting it on uneven terrain. All right, learning objective 7. Moving on to the next one here. Describe ways to secure a ground ladder. So when we're securing ground ladders, depending on what type of ladder, how we're working with it, there's, a couple different ways we can secure it. So with the extension ladder, we want to make sure they're locked against the structure. Dogs are the locks. They're locked into the rung, right? We'll tie our halyard off with our clove hitch or whatever knot you want to use to secure it, right? Heel and or secure the ladder with the rope to a firm object nearby. We can do that. We can also use an individual to heel the ladder at the bottom as well. Anytime we're operating with ladder on the fire ground, whether it be on a scene or in a training, we need to be in full PPE, right? So we need to keep us safe. We need to be alert for falling objects or debris, from the overhead obstructions, right? And stay alert for firefighters descending off and on the ladder, and that kind of goes back to communication. So let's talk about heeling beneath the ladder. We need to stand with the feet and shoulder width apart, right? We'll grasp the beams on the side. Why don't we want to grasp the rungs?
Because I like my fingers.
Right. If you're yeah, exactly. If you're grabbing the rungs, there's obviously a chance that if you're not paying attention and the guy climbing the ladder is not paying attention, your fingers are going to get stepped on. All right. When you're grabbing the beams, just like that guy is here in the presentation, that's a pretty solid way to secure it, and your fingers aren't going to get stepped on. It's important also too, if you're heeling the ladder, not to look up. It kind of goes back to the falling debris, just look straight ahead, make sure your helmet's on, and hold that ladder tight while those guys are working. You got other guys around, in front of that ladder watching what's going on up above. So the guy heeling this ladder's main job is to make sure that, it's not going anywhere. Heeling from outside the ladder. You can do it on this other side as well. Stand on the ladder, chalk the butt with one foot, place toes against butt spur, or place one foot on the bottom of the rung, grasp the beams, and press it against the building. So we'll touch more on this when we go outside and do the practical portion. If we're going to be tying in a ladder, okay, obviously this prevents the ladder from pulling away from the building or the tree or whatever, we're putting that ladder up against. So I'm sure most of you guys carry a piece of webbing, or a small piece of rope in your gear. We can just take that out, tie the ladder off to that, and it prevents it from pulling away, right? What are 2 methods of securing a ground ladder? Review question.
Tie it off.
We can tie it off, or
Hold it.
we can have somebody hold it and have somebody heel the ladder. All right. Our next objective, moving on to this next one, is describe methods for raising and lowering a ladder. So raising methods can depend on a few different things, right? The type of ladder that we got, what size it is. If it's a bigger ladder, obviously we need to be, thinking about how many personnel do we have available to raise this ladder, okay? What's the weather like outside? How's the terrain on the ground? Is it even? Is it uneven? Once we get to where we're going, set up, transition from a carry to a raise, right? So it's a couple things here. Not necessary to place ladder flat on the ground prior to raising, okay? The only thing that needs to be on the ground is the butt end or the bottom of the ladder, right? So we're not going to raise the butt up against the roof. We're going to raise the tip or the top to where we're going. When we do this, it should be done smooth and in a continuous motion. And we'll touch more on this when we go outside and do our practicals. It's kind of hard to talk about carrying and raising in the classroom. We can get more hands-on, obviously, when we're done. So we've got our one firefighter raise with a single ladder or extension ladder. It looks like in this video here, he's doing a beam raise on each one of these. So we'll just put the beam on our shoulder and we'll just walk it up through up to the structure where we're going. If we're doing a one firefighter raise like he is, you can place the bottom of the ladder or the butt against the structure. That way you know it's really not going to go anywhere as you're raising it up to wherever you got to go. We got the two firefighter raise. So instead of placing that ladder up against the building when you're by yourself, the other guy will just stand at the butt end of the ladder and basically heel it and hold it in place while your second guy starts at the tip or the top and raises it all the way up, as you can see here. So it looks like they're doing a flat raise on the left and a beam raise on the right. And then we have our three firefighter raise. So it says here it needs to be ladders 35 feet or longer, typically require at least 3 firefighters. So I'd say that's a pretty safe assumption. I mean, they're big, they're heavy, right? However, you know, we don't have 100 guys on the fire ground when we first get there. We might need to throw a ladder up as soon as we get there to make a rescue or something like that, right? So you're probably just doing that either, you know, 2 guys minimum, I'd hope, right? If you've got that third guy and that fourth guy, that's great, you know, but you do what you can with what you have, right? So we've got a 4 firefighter raise. We'll definitely use that for larger and heavier extension ladders, right? For that, a flat raise is normally used. So they're heavier. If you're doing the flat raise, you can get a guy on each side, going up each side as you raise it up, right? It'd be kind of difficult to raise the ladder that heavy with 4 guys on a beam raise. Just makes it a little bit more unstable, in my opinion. The procedure for it, it's similar to 3 firefighter raise, except placement of personnel, kind of like I just talked about when you're doing it with the flat raise. You put a guy on each side, and it usually goes up pretty easily. So a review question here. What methods can be used to raise a ground ladder with either 1 or 2 firefighters? The beam raise.
The flat raise?
The flat raise, right. If we're going to pivot a raised ladder, it's really only necessary the fly is incorrectly positioned. So if it's on the outside, it needs to be on the inside. If it's inside, it needs to be on the outside. Vice versa. Ladder is flat raised parallel to the building. We want to pivot before extension if possible. Now that's not always the case. I feel like there'll be a lot of times you'll extend that ladder to where you want to go, and then you'll realize, oh man, we need to spin this thing around, right? So kind of goes back to checking for overhead obstructions once, but not twice, before you raise that ladder, to give you more of an idea of what you're, raising it into. Therefore, you can pivot it before you extend it, right? And you'll want to pivot on the beam closest to the structure. So shifting a raised ladder, it should be limited to a short distance. We don't want to shift the ladder, 100 feet away from its original location, right? It's a lot of work. You run into safety hazards, things like that. One firefighter can probably safely shift the ladder, a single ladder, that is 20 feet or shorter, right? If we've got an extension ladder, it's probably going to take more than one guy to shift it. Maybe two, maybe three guys. This last one. One method is to slide top of ladder sideways against the building, then move the butt into position. So we'll be able to kind of go over that when we do the practical as well. So review question here. How can a ground ladder be moved once it is already raised and in place?
Shifted.
Shifted, absolutely. All right, so are there any questions about anything we've covered in the classroom?
I don't have any questions.
No.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll stop here. We'll take about a 5-10 minute break, and we'll go and we'll do our practical portion.